Hey guys, what's up? Ross Dunn. And this is a little bit delayed, I suppose. Well, the article is about 2 days old, but I suppose this is kind of a video response, or at least a video analysis of the Huffington Post article titled, "Sorry Liberals, a violent response to Trump is as logical as any." Now, before I get going on this, I have like a love-hate relationship with Huffington Post. They're kind of got this real sort of broken clock is right twice a day thing going on. And they have had for a long time. There's a lot of times where I agree with Huffington Post on some social issues, but a lot of the time, in fact the vast majority of the time, I fucking don't. They're generally a poisonous little fucking rag. Arianna Huffington is a rat-faced bitch. I can't fucking stand her. It's ironic that she, not necessarily she no longer represents the rag itself, but I would imagine they would at least try and have some sort of editorial consistency with what Arianna originally sort of intended. And I distinctly remember about 8 years ago, when Hillary Clinton was running for president against Barack Obama, Arianna Huffington, like, almost specifically telling Clinton that she should get the fuck back in the kitchen and look after her kids. I have a friend who has a theory that basically Arianna Huffington really wanted to get on Bill Clinton's dick, but I'm sort of shitting on her, and it's kind of an aside. I'm not a big fan of Arianna Huffington, never have been, and by extension, not a huge fan of her goddamn dumbass newspaper. But this particular news story or article that has been posted by Jesse Ben, who cites himself as an engaged citizen, opinionated writer, critical media studies scholar, amateur photographer and videographer, and engages in random acts of journalism. For all intents and purposes, Jesse has tacitly endorsed violence against people whose speech he does not agree with. I'm going to jump into the article, and then I'm going to read a bit, and then I'm going to comment on it, and then we're going to come back. So we open with, "The rise of Donald Trump has exposed the frightening underbelly of America's foulest tendencies. Our racism, nativism, xenophobia, misogyny, Islamophobia, ableism, and a propensity towards authoritarianism has been laid bare. Reactions from those who stand opposed to these manifestations of oppression have varied from calm condemnation and routine protests to blockades of roads and borderline riotous outbursts, including sporadic violence in various cities. This isn't a coincidence. There are many examples of Trump inciting violence in the New York Times put together this video documenting some of them. A powerful video juxtaposing this longing from the violence against protesters from the good old days with images from the civil rights era recently went viral. There's been an upswing in anti-Muslim hate crimes, correlating with his candidacy, including several offenders who cite him as their inspiration. Another of his supporters beat an unhoused Latino man, and yet another sucker punched a demonstrator at a rally, then, more alarmingly, went on to say, the next time we see him, we might have to kill him. Trump has not just flagrantly violated the typical boundaries of political discourse, his candidacy is linked to multiple instances of violence. It shouldn't be a surprise that opposition to him has responded in kind. Yet a lot of people seem shocked and appalled with this perfectly logical reaction in the face of media, politicians, and GOP primary voters normalizing Trump as a presidential candidate. Whatever your personal beliefs regarding violent resistance, there's an inherent value in forestalling Trump's normalization. Violent resistance accomplishes this in spite of such, and this resistance is more offensive and unacceptable to society's norms and liberal sensibilities than the nastiness being resisted in the first place. First and foremost, we're stopping there. It is ironic that this article not even tacitly supports violence against Trump and Trump's protesters or Trump's supporters, but it claims a kind of authoritarian, that Trump and his supporters are authoritarians. Now, that's kind of true. A lot of times, people on the right are kind of tacitly in favor of social authoritarianism, until it backfires on them, and then they immediately drop it. A really great example of this is sort of when it comes to authoritarian right vice laws in things like moral instances. They're all in favor of it until it immediately backfires, which it always does. The right is very quick to learn when it burns itself, when it bites an electrical circuit and gets a jolt. It very quickly learns not to do it again, or at least it makes an attempt. It's very strange for you to sit here and claim that this is the rise of authoritarianism, which I'm kind of not even necessarily going to disagree with, but then agree with and encourage authoritarian counterpoints. It's nonsense. The article continues in a similar vein. As a result, a litany of think pieces and condemnations from liberal media and politicians are making their rounds to make it clear how unacceptable and counterproductive any violence or rioting is, urging people to listen to the other side and use legitimate means to fight Trump's rise, ignoring the possibility of fascism rising with it. This article goes on to continue to state that Trump isn't a fascist, whilst simultaneously claiming that he is fascistic. Fascism is an extremely vague political theory. That's the problem with fascism, is using the label, because there were like literally two fascist states in the history of politics, and they both had extremely short lifespans. Actual fascistic theory and fascistic political writing is quite slim. For the most part, it seems to be sort of generally agreed upon that it's extreme right-wing authoritarian views. However, it's hard to disconnect those sorts of views. See, the authoritarian right is a weird thing because it's kind of weak on the grounds of socially. It stands on weak ground. It tends to rely on religious backing, and when it doesn't have that, it becomes like jelly. It's very hard to stand by itself. And the majority of fascistic theory does not necessarily rely on the religious authoritarianism in a traditional sense. So, I'm kind of rambling here, and I don't really have a point, I suppose, but screaming fascism is a really silly thing to do, because it's not something that really, it's a nebulous statement. It's like walking into a bar and ordering a drink, and the bartender just calls you a racist. You haven't done anything racist, you haven't really made a vaguely racist statement, but it's completely disconnected. Let me continue. Those who stray from this non-violent narrative, like Emmett Risen, a video editor at Vox, tweeted that people should riot when Trump comes to town, and he faced swift and punitive redness, urging them to fall back in line. Amid the hot takes and the denunciations of liberals, they all seem to miss a few key points. First, they misplace blame. Second, they misunderstand the desired outcome from violent resistance and these protesting Trump in general. And third, they ignore the history of successful violent insurrection in the U.S., instead of favoring the elemental school revision of history in which nonviolence is the only means of struggle that has ever achieved a thing. Martin Luther King achieved much in America with almost no violence. The discrediting of non-violent action is stunning in this instance. The thing about non-violent protest and non-violent action is it tends to take time. It does happen, it just doesn't happen on a time scale that revolutionaries are particularly impressed or happy with. A lot of revolutionaries would prefer that their action come about quickly and readily, and it's just the ideal means to do this is obviously through violent reform. Let's continue. Point 1. The denunciation of violence from anti-Trump protesters rests upon the misguided view and the divide that Trump's exposed a typical political disagreement within partisans to be handled as such. This is first, Jesus Christ, this article rambles quite a bit. But the point that, again, it sort of comes around to this author at Huffington Post trying to make Trump appear as a fascist, whilst simultaneously saying that he's kind of not. It's very weird that, the article continues, I'm actually going to stop there. The problem for me with this whole article and this whole statement is ultimately comes down to a few things. The proclamation that Trump is simultaneously a fascist and not a fascist. The second problem is the decrying of authoritarianism on the right whilst simultaneously celebrating authoritarianism on the left. This is profoundly hypocritical. I mean, you might think that, okay, we're... The end goals of both of these authoritative actions are obviously different, and they are. However, the reality is that the means to get to those places are not unimportant. They're really not. And in fairness, more of the reasoning on this article as it continues is quite literally just that Trump has done violence to us, so we should do violence back. And the thing about it is Trump's violence, quote unquote, is sort of quasi at best. It's him slipping, in fairness, it's him slipping in and out of responsibility for these things. Him telling people in his audience, get him out of here, get him out of here, can be construed in a certain way. And the thing is that most people aren't really considering the fact that at Trump's rallies, they're private events. You have to keep that in mind as well. Your personal rights to free expression are somewhat limited at private venues. You cannot just start screaming about how you feel on a subject and start shouting epithets and not expect to be removed from the premises. I'm sorry, that's kind of how it works. And for the vast majority of the time, the quote-unquote violence that is occurring at Trump's rallies are happening, as I said, inside a private event. I'm not saying it's okay that violence is occurring. That's never okay. But there is a greater precedent. And I'm sorry that I now have to defend violence, which I don't like doing. But there is a greater precedent. So, ultimately, the argument on this whole article boils down to, he hit me, so I'm going to hit him. I can't use my adult words. I'm going to use my baby words. There is, realistically, for as far as this has gone, for as far as the Trump situation has developed, I still don't see him being able to enact the kind of authoritarian legislation that people are scared of. First and foremost, the level of solidarity that exists within the right wing over Trump is dramatically overstated online. He is already really, really, really pissed off every single libertarian out there. At least every single libertarian who's worth his fucking salt and who isn't a complete moron who's willing to disregard his morality the minute that he sees a shiny penny. The core of the GOP can't stand him. He keeps getting flip-flop endorsements from people like Paul Ryan and Lindsey Graham because the motherfucker can't open his mouth without saying something stupid. I mean, you look at his recent statements on the Mexican judge. That was racist. There's no argument there. Trump can no longer make the statement that he's not a racist, or that his allies can no longer make the statement that he's not a racist. He is. He is saying racist things. That is a direct quote. There are other quotes as well, and to a point, even I was defending his quote-unquote non-racism until he started making blatantly racist statements. His internal campaign staff have said that basically his campaign is a disaster. He's not willing to spend the money to get this shit rolling, and I'm not trying to discredit the idea that Trump could be president. It's not what I'm saying. I just still think it's sort of unlikely. I still think that Hillary Clinton is probably going to win, and a lot of people are saying, okay, well, I guess it's no change, to quote Cenk-Uygur from the Young Turks. But I don't feel that any of this is warranted. I don't feel that any of this violence is okay. To support violence is extremely shitty. You're a shitty person if you think that this is okay. If you think that behaving like this and attacking people on this level is fine, you're a moron. It shouldn't be done. I don't care if he's a racist. I don't care if his worldview does not align with yours. You do not attack people physically who disagree with you. You use your big boy voice. You use your big boy words. You do not throw a temper tantrum and inflict violence upon others. I'm Ross Dunn. Peace.